Some truths don't break your heart the day you lose someone. They wait for years until one ordinary moment destroys everything you thought you knew. Ethan Brooks had attended hundreds of charity galas over the past decade, but none of them had ever managed to surprise him. Manhattan's wealthiest investors, politicians, celebrities, and business leaders filled the ballroom of the Grand Astoria Hotel with effortless confidence, their laughter blending with the soft melody of a live jazz quartet. Crystal chandeliers scattered warm light across polished marble floors, while servers carried silver trays filled with sparkling water and elegant appetizers. Everything about the evening reflected the life Ethan had spent years building, one where every minute was scheduled, every decision calculated, and every emotion carefully hidden beneath the composed smile that had made him one of America's youngest billionaire CEOs. At 42, success had become routine. Headlines praised his leadership. Financial magazines celebrated his discipline. Employees admired his fairness. Yet every time another achievement arrived, it filled a place that somehow remained empty. He rarely admitted that even to himself. His assistant had spent the entire afternoon convincing him to stay at the fundraiser longer than 20 minutes, insisting the event would generate valuable partnerships for the foundation his company sponsored. Ethan had agreed only because saying no required more effort than showing up. He adjusted the cuff of his tailored navy suit and politely acknowledged familiar faces as they greeted him, never lingering long enough for conversation. His mind was already drifting toward tomorrow morning's board meeting when a sudden ripple of movement near the entrance caught his attention. Guests instinctively stepped aside to make room for someone arriving late. Ethan glanced over without interest, expecting another donor or politician. Instead, time quietly stopped. A woman walked into the ballroom wearing a simple ivory maternity dress beneath a light beige coat that contrasted sharply with the designer gowns surrounding her. She carried herself with calm dignity despite standing alone, her posture graceful, her expression composed, as though she had learned long ago not to expect anyone to welcome her. Ethan's heartbeat stumbled before he even recognized her face. Claire Bennett. For several seconds, the sounds around him disappeared beneath the rush of memories he had spent years burying beneath work. He remembered rainy afternoons in Boston when they shared coffee from the same paper cup because neither of them could afford two. He remembered celebrating tiny victories inside a cramped apartment filled with secondhand furniture. He remembered promising that no amount of money would ever matter more than choosing each other. Then he remembered the silence. The arguments that grew colder every week. The unanswered calls. The day she disappeared from his life without giving him a chance to understand why. 8 years had passed since he last saw her. 8 years without a single conversation. 8 years convincing himself she had chosen another future. Yet none of those thoughts prepared him for the unmistakable curve beneath her dress. Claire was pregnant. Ethan felt the room tilt almost imperceptibly. His breathing slowed as his eyes remained fixed on her. She looked older now, not because of age, but because life had quietly written patience across her face. There was still kindness in her eyes, but it was guarded, protected by experiences he knew nothing about. She greeted an older woman with a warm smile before accepting a glass of sparkling water instead of champagne. The simple gesture somehow made the reality impossible to ignore. She was expecting a baby. Ethan instinctively stepped behind one of the marble columns without understanding why. It wasn't fear exactly. It was disbelief. Every assumption he had lived with for nearly a decade suddenly felt unstable. His gaze drifted downward for only a second before another detail froze him completely. Around Claire's neck hung a delicate silver chain. At its center rested a small vintage compass pendant. Ethan knew every tiny scratch on its surface because he had bought it from a street market during a weekend trip they once took together when they had barely enough money for gas. He had searched for months after their separation, believing she had thrown everything away. Yet there it was, resting against her heart after all these years. His chest tightened. Why would she still wear it? Claire gently placed one hand over the pendant while speaking softly with another guest, completely unaware that Ethan stood less than 30 feet away staring at the one question he had never been able to answer. She had left without explanation. She had vanished without looking back. So why had she kept the only gift he ever gave her? Ethan's pulse quickened as conflicting memories collided inside his mind. He suddenly realized something far more unsettling than seeing Claire again. For the first time in 8 years, he could no longer trust the story he had spent so long telling himself. Ethan remained motionless behind the marble column long after every reasonable excuse to walk away had disappeared. Around him, conversations flowed effortlessly, glasses clinked together, and cameras flashed as donors greeted one another with practiced smiles. But every familiar sound felt strangely distant. His attention never left Claire. She laughed softly at something the elderly woman beside her had said, yet even from across the ballroom, he noticed the subtle restraint in her expression. Years ago, Claire had laughed without hesitation, throwing her head back with the kind of joy that made everyone nearby smile with her. This smile was different. It was gentle, grateful even, but carefully measured, as though life had taught her to protect every emotion before allowing it into the open. Ethan found himself studying details he should not have remembered so clearly. She still tucked a loose strand of hair behind her right ear whenever she felt uncomfortable. She still held her glass with both hands instead of one whenever she was surrounded by strangers. She still glanced toward the nearest exit every few minutes. A habit she once confessed came from growing up with anxiety whenever large crowds became overwhelming. 8 years had passed, yet those small pieces of Claire remained untouched by time. It was everything else that had changed. His eyes drifted once more toward the silver compass resting against her chest. The tiny pendant reflected the ballroom lights every time she moved. Ethan remembered buying it during a rainy Saturday afternoon in a small antique shop outside Boston. Claire had laughed because the old shop owner insisted every compass eventually guided people back to where they truly belonged. Ethan had joked that they would never need directions because they already had each other. She had smiled before answering that life had a strange way of testing promises. At the time, he thought she was simply being poetic. Now those words echoed through his memory with uncomfortable weight. Why would she keep something connected to a man she supposedly chose to leave forever? His thoughts were interrupted as another guest approached Claire. A distinguished gray-haired physician greeted her warmly before carefully helping her into a nearby chair. Ethan watched Claire instinctively rest one hand over her stomach as she thanked him. The gesture was protective, almost unconscious. It was the kind of movement that only came naturally to someone already deeply connected to the child she carried. Ethan swallowed hard. He had spent years believing Claire had walked away because she wanted a different life, someone else, another future without him. That explanation had become the foundation beneath every decision he made afterward. Work replaced relationships. Success replaced vulnerability. If he stayed busy enough, there would never be time to question the past. But standing there now, he realized something unsettling. The memory he had repeated to himself for nearly a decade contained surprisingly few facts. He remembered the argument. He remembered finding their apartment empty. He remembered the handwritten note that simply said she was sorry and that leaving was the only choice left. Everything after that had been built from assumptions. He assumed she had stopped loving him. He assumed she wanted someone wealthier, someone more successful, someone who could give her the future he could not afford back then. Those assumptions had slowly transformed into certainty, even though he had never actually heard the truth from Claire herself. Ethan exhaled slowly, almost frustrated with his own thoughts. It was dangerous to revisit old wounds. Successful people survived by accepting reality and moving forward, not by reopening chapters that could never change. Yet reality no longer felt as solid as it had an hour earlier. Claire suddenly looked toward the opposite side of the ballroom. Ethan instinctively stepped farther into the shadows before she could notice him. A younger woman hurried over carrying a folded shawl. Claire accepted it with appreciation as the woman smiled and briefly placed a comforting hand on her shoulder. They exchanged a few quiet words before both of them laughed softly. Ethan could not hear the conversation, but he noticed something that tightened his chest even more. Claire looked genuinely supported. She was not alone. Someone cared enough to notice she might be cold before she even asked. For reasons he could not explain, that realization brought equal parts relief and sadness. He wanted to believe she had found happiness, yet another part of him felt unexpectedly excluded from a life he once imagined they would build together. Then his attention shifted to a small object resting beside Claire's chair. It was a cream-colored gift bag decorated with tiny gold stars. As another guest leaned over to congratulate her, The top opened just enough for Ethan to glimpse the corner of a folded greeting card. Across the front, written in elegant blue handwriting, were only 4 visible words. For Baby Bennett. Ethan stared at the name until the letters blurred together. Bennett. Claire had never changed her last name. She had never replaced it with anyone else's. His heartbeat grew louder with every passing second. If she had built a completely different life, why was she still Claire Bennett? And if the child she carried belonged to someone else, why did the questions that had haunted him for years suddenly feel more alive than ever before? The name on the gift bag refused to leave Ethan's mind even after someone stepped in front of his view and blocked Claire from sight for several seconds. Bennett. It was such a simple detail that no one else in the ballroom would have questioned, yet for him it quietly unraveled years of certainty. He had convinced himself that Claire had built another life, married someone else, and erased every trace of what they once shared. That belief had become easier than accepting the possibility that the story had never been as simple as he imagined. He slowly moved toward the edge of the ballroom, where the floor-to-ceiling windows overlooked the Manhattan skyline. The city lights shimmered across the Hudson River, but he barely noticed them. Instead, his thoughts drifted backward to the final months before Claire disappeared. At the time, Ethan had been working nearly 18 hours a day trying to save the small technology company that would eventually become one of the country's most successful corporations. Investors demanded impossible deadlines. Payroll depended on contracts that seemed to collapse every week. Every setback convinced him that one more sacrifice would finally secure the future they both dreamed about. Claire never complained about the long nights. She left handwritten notes beside the coffee maker every morning. She packed sandwiches whenever she knew he would skip lunch. She celebrated every small victory with the same enthusiasm she would later reserve for life's biggest milestones. Looking back now, Ethan realized something painfully obvious. He remembered everything he had been chasing, but almost nothing about what Claire had quietly been carrying alone. He searched his memory for signs he might have missed. Had she seemed unusually tired? Had she canceled plans more often than usual? Had she smiled differently during those last few weeks together? At the time, he had dismissed every change as ordinary stress. His company consumed every ounce of attention he possessed. The uncomfortable possibility settled heavily across his chest. What if he had simply failed to notice the most important chapter of her life because he had been too focused on building his own? Ethan closed his eyes briefly. No, that could not be enough to explain why she vanished. Claire was not someone who walked away without a reason. She believed conversations solved problems. She believed promises deserved second chances. Those beliefs were exactly what made her disappearance so impossible to understand. A familiar voice interrupted his thoughts. Ethan, there you are. He turned to see his longtime legal advisor, Richard Collins, carrying 2 glasses of sparkling water. Richard had known him for nearly 15 years and immediately recognized the unusual tension on Ethan's face. You look like you have seen a ghost, Richard said with a gentle smile. Ethan accepted the glass without taking a sip. Have you ever been completely certain about something for years, only to realize you might have built that certainty on assumptions? Richard studied him carefully before answering. More often than I care to admit. What? Ethan hesitated. His instinct was to dismiss the conversation, but another glance toward Claire made that impossible. Do you remember Claire Bennett? Richard's eyebrows lifted with quiet surprise. I remember the name. You never talked much about her after everything. Ethan nodded slowly. She is here tonight. Richard followed Ethan's line of sight until he located Claire across the room. His expression softened. That must be difficult. It should have been simple, Ethan admitted quietly. I was supposed to see her, wish her well, and move on. Instead, nothing makes sense anymore. Richard remained silent, allowing Ethan to continue. She is expecting a baby. Richard glanced back toward Claire before returning his attention to Ethan. I can see why that would bring back memories. Ethan lowered his voice. She is still wearing the compass I gave her. Richard did not respond immediately. He simply looked at his friend with the calm patience of someone who understood that answers arrived more slowly than questions. People keep meaningful things for many reasons, he finally said. Sometimes because they cannot forget. Sometimes because they have forgiven. Sometimes because a story was never finished. Ethan stared at the ballroom once again. Claire was preparing to leave her table with the younger woman beside her. As she carefully stood, the older physician offered his arm to help her navigate through the crowd. Before they disappeared toward another section of the event, Claire instinctively glanced across the room. Their eyes did not meet, but Ethan felt an inexplicable certainty that she had paused for a reason she could not explain either. Then she gently rested her hand over the compass beneath her necklace once more. It was the exact same unconscious gesture he had watched only minutes earlier. Ethan's pulse quickened. For years he had believed he needed closure. Now he realized he needed something far more unsettling. He needed the truth, because the life he had spent 8 years accepting was beginning to look less like reality and more like a story he had invented to survive. The applause inside the ballroom rose as the master of ceremonies welcomed another speaker to the stage, but Ethan barely heard a single word. The questions gathering inside his mind had become louder than the room itself. For years he had believed that the past belonged exactly where it was, buried beneath success, responsibility, and carefully constructed routines. Tonight that belief had quietly fallen apart. He watched Claire disappear into a smaller reception area reserved for foundation sponsors and medical professionals. The entrance closed behind her, leaving only a brief glimpse of her ivory dress before she vanished from sight. Every instinct told him to let the evening end without disturbing her. Every unanswered question urged him to do the opposite. Ethan chose neither. Instead, he reached into the inside pocket of his jacket and quietly stepped toward a secluded hallway overlooking the hotel gardens. He opened his phone and scrolled through contacts until he found the name of someone he trusted completely. Olivia Grant had served as his executive assistant for nearly 12 years. She knew how to uncover information without crossing ethical boundaries, and more importantly, she knew when to stop asking questions. She answered before the second ring. "Good evening, Ethan. Is everything all right?" Her cheerful voice contrasted sharply with the uncertainty filling his thoughts. "I need a favor," he said calmly. "Nothing involving the company. This is personal." Olivia immediately recognized the seriousness in his tone. "Tell me what you need." Ethan hesitated for only a moment. "There is a guest attending tonight's charity gala. Her name is Claire Bennett." Silence followed for several seconds. Olivia had heard that name only once many years earlier when she accidentally discovered an old photograph tucked inside one of Ethan's notebooks. She had never asked about it again. "I understand," she replied softly. "What would you like me to find?" Ethan looked through the glass doors toward the ballroom before answering. "Nothing intrusive. I do not want private medical records or anything inappropriate. I only want publicly available information. Where she has been living. What organization invited her tonight. Whether she has been involved with the foundation before." Olivia typed quietly as he spoke. "I can have preliminary information within an hour." Ethan closed his eyes briefly. "Do not contact her. Do not let anyone know you are looking." "Of course." She paused before adding gently. "Are you certain you want to reopen this chapter?" Ethan stared at his own reflection in the dark window. "I am no longer certain I ever closed it." After ending the call, he slipped the phone back into his pocket and remained outside for another minute, allowing the cool evening air to settle his thoughts. He reminded himself that he was not searching for reconciliation. He was not trying to rewrite the past. He simply wanted facts to replace assumptions. That felt reasonable. Yet somewhere deep inside, another part of him quietly admitted that facts alone might not be enough anymore. When he returned to the ballroom, guests had begun moving between exhibit tables displaying photographs of children whose hospital treatments had been funded by the charity. Ethan slowly walked through the gallery, studying each display more out of habit than attention. Then he stopped. Near the center of the room stood Claire. She was speaking with a young volunteer wearing a hospital identification badge. The conversation appeared warm and familiar. Claire accepted a folder from the volunteer before smiling with genuine gratitude. Ethan noticed something he had not expected. The people approaching Claire did not greet her because of wealth or influence. They greeted her because they seemed to know her personally. Nurses, physicians, volunteers, parents holding young children. One little girl no older than 6 ran across the room with careful excitement before wrapping her arms around Claire's waist. Claire laughed softly and knelt as much as her pregnancy allowed, brushing a strand of hair away from the child's face. The little girl proudly showed her a colorful drawing decorated with stars and flowers. Claire studied every detail as though it were a priceless masterpiece before praising the artwork with heartfelt enthusiasm. The child's mother watched nearby, with visible appreciation. Ethan felt another assumption quietly collapse. Whatever Claire had been doing all these years, she had clearly become part of a community built around compassion rather than status. She looked peaceful in a way he had almost forgotten was possible. Moments later, the volunteer reached for the folder Claire had been holding. Several papers slipped free and drifted gently onto the polished floor. Claire instinctively bent forward to retrieve them, but before she could, Ethan found himself already moving across the room. He stopped only a few feet away as another guest reached the papers first and handed them back to Claire with a polite smile. She thanked the man warmly without ever noticing Ethan standing just behind the crowd. As the papers were gathered, one page briefly faced his direction. Across the top, printed in bold blue letters, he caught only a single line before it disappeared back inside the folder. Maternal Family Wellness Program. Beneath the title appeared Claire's name, followed by two words that left him completely still. Volunteer Mentor. Ethan watched as Claire thanked the staff member once again before walking toward another family waiting to speak with her. She was not there as a guest seeking attention. She was there because people genuinely depended on her. And for the first time since seeing her again, Ethan realized the woman standing across the room had lived an entire life without him, one filled with stories he had never even imagined. The remainder of the evening unfolded around Ethan as though he were watching someone else's life. Business partners approached to congratulate him on another successful quarter. Donors thanked him for supporting the hospital foundation. Reporters politely requested a brief interview. He answered every question with the same calm professionalism that had become second nature over the years, yet his attention continued drifting toward Claire whenever the crowd allowed even the smallest glimpse of her. The more he observed, the more impossible his old assumptions became. Claire was not pretending to be happy. She genuinely cared about every family who stopped to speak with her. She remembered children's names without hesitation. She asked parents about follow-up appointments, school projects, and birthdays. They responded with sincere affection rather than polite admiration. She belonged here in a way that money could never purchase. Ethan quietly wondered how many lives she had touched while he spent those same years chasing board meetings, acquisitions, and headlines. Nearly an hour later, the evening program began drawing to a close. Guests slowly collected their coats while hotel staff prepared the ballroom for the next event. Claire thanked several volunteers before accepting her light beige coat from the younger woman who had remained close to her throughout the evening. Together, they started walking toward a quieter hallway leading to the hotel's private exit. Ethan knew the moment was slipping away. If he let her leave without speaking, another 8 years might pass before chance offered another opportunity. His heart urged him forward while his mind warned him to leave the past untouched. Before he could reconsider, his feet had already carried him across the polished floor. Claire. He spoke her name softly, almost afraid the sound itself might disappear before reaching her. She stopped immediately. Her shoulders stiffened ever so slightly before she slowly turned around. For several silent seconds, neither of them spoke. The hallway seemed strangely distant despite the people still passing nearby. Claire looked at him with quiet composure, her blue eyes revealing surprise, but not panic. She had recognized his voice instantly. "Hello, Ethan," she said gently. Hearing his name in her voice again after so many years unsettled him more than he expected. It sounded familiar, yet shaped by time, carrying kindness without the effortless warmth they once shared. "I was not sure you would remember me," he admitted with a faint smile that barely reached his eyes. Claire returned a small, polite smile. Some people are impossible to forget. The sentence lingered between them without revealing whether it carried gratitude, sadness, or simple honesty. Ethan searched her expression, hoping to find some clue hidden beneath her calm exterior, but Claire revealed nothing beyond quiet courtesy. "You look well," he said after another pause. She nodded. "Thank you. You do too. Congratulations on everything you have accomplished. I have seen your company in the news many times." Ethan almost laughed at the strange formality of the conversation. Once they had known each other's dreams before they were even spoken aloud. Now they sounded like respectful strangers meeting after a conference. "I never expected to see you here tonight," he confessed. Claire glanced briefly toward the ballroom before answering. The hospital foundation invited several volunteer mentors to attend. I almost declined, but one of the families insisted I come. Ethan nodded slowly. I am glad you did. Another silence settled between them, heavier than the first. Countless questions crowded his thoughts. Why did you leave? Why did you keep the compass? Are you happy? Who is waiting for you at home? None of them seemed fair to ask. Claire gently rested one hand against her coat, as though reassuring the child she carried. Ethan noticed the movement immediately, but forced himself not to stare. She noticed his hesitation and followed his gaze for only a brief moment before meeting his eyes again. There was no embarrassment in her expression, only quiet acceptance. Life changes in ways we never expect, she said softly. Ethan looked at her for several seconds before answering. I have been realizing that all evening. Claire offered another small smile, but this one carried unmistakable sadness. Some answers arrive much later than we hope. Before Ethan could respond, the younger woman approached from the nearby doorway. Claire, the driver just texted. He is waiting outside whenever you are ready. Claire nodded appreciatively before turning back to Ethan one final time. It was good to see you again, she said sincerely. She extended her hand with gentle professionalism, as though unsure whether anything more personal would be welcome after so many years. Ethan looked at the offered hand for only an instant before carefully shaking it. Her fingers were warm despite the cool evening air. The brief touch awakened memories he had spent years trying to silence, yet it also revealed something entirely new. Claire was wearing no wedding ring. As she slowly withdrew her hand, the silver compass slipped from beneath her coat once again, catching the hallway lights for a fleeting second before she turned toward the exit. Ethan remained standing exactly where she left him, watching until the hotel doors quietly closed behind her. For the second time in his life, Claire disappeared from view, but this time she had left behind more questions than answers, and one undeniable truth had become impossible to ignore. The story he believed had ended 8 years ago had never truly ended at all. The drive home felt unusually quiet despite the constant glow of Manhattan traffic beyond the tinted windows of Ethan's town car. Normally, he spent every ride reviewing financial reports or preparing for the next day's meetings. But tonight his tablet remained untouched beside him. Every traffic light seemed to replay the same image inside his mind. Claire standing beneath the warm hotel lights with one hand resting gently over the life she carried, still wearing the small silver compass he had once believed she had thrown away forever. He arrived at his penthouse shortly before 10 o'clock, loosened his tie, and stood before the floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city that had become both his greatest achievement and his greatest hiding place. Years ago, he convinced himself that success would eventually silence regret. Instead, it had simply buried it beneath endless work until one unexpected evening uncovered everything again. His phone vibrated quietly against the kitchen counter. The caller identification displayed Olivia Grant. Ethan answered immediately. Did you find anything? He asked. Only information that is publicly available, exactly as you requested, Olivia replied. Papers shuffled softly on the other end of the call. Claire Bennett has lived in Boston for the past several years. About 18 months ago, she relocated to New York after accepting a leadership position with the Maternal Family Wellness Program. She coordinates volunteer mentors for expectant mothers facing difficult circumstances. Ethan listened without interrupting. Every new detail painted a picture completely different from the one he had imagined for nearly a decade. Olivia continued. She has received recognition from several nonprofit organizations for community service. There are interviews online where parents speak very highly of her work, but she rarely gives interviews herself. She keeps an extremely low public profile. Ethan slowly sat down at the dining table. Anything about her family? Another brief pause followed. There is remarkably little. No marriage records that I could locate. No public announcement of an engagement. No indication that she has ever changed her last name. Ethan closed his eyes for a moment. The absence of information somehow felt louder than any answer could have been. Thank you, Olivia. She hesitated before ending the call. There is one more thing. I almost overlooked it because it seemed unrelated. Ethan straightened slightly. Go ahead. 3 years ago, she received a regional humanitarian award. During the ceremony, she thanked someone named Margaret Lawson for changing her life during what she described as the darkest season she had ever experienced. That is the only personal reference I found in any speech or article. The name meant nothing to Ethan. Margaret Lawson, he repeated quietly. Yes, I thought you should know. After the call ended, Ethan searched the name online himself. Within seconds, a biography appeared. Margaret Lawson was a retired maternity nurse who had spent more than 40 years helping mothers through high-risk pregnancies before becoming a volunteer counselor after retirement. Ethan stared at the screen longer than necessary. High-risk pregnancies. The words stirred an uncomfortable feeling he could not explain. Before he could explore the thought further, another memory unexpectedly surfaced. Nearly 9 years earlier, Claire had canceled a weekend hiking trip they had planned for months because she had not been feeling well. She blamed exhaustion from work. Ethan remembered teasing her about working too hard before rushing back to the office himself. A week later, she canceled another dinner with friends for the same reason. At the time, he barely questioned it. Looking back now, those forgotten moments no longer seemed insignificant. His thoughts were interrupted by another notification. Olivia had forwarded a link to a newspaper article covering the humanitarian award. Ethan opened it immediately. Most of the article focused on the organization's outreach programs, but one paragraph quoted Claire directly. She had said, "Sometimes the person who helps you survive never realizes how many lives they quietly save afterward. I hope to offer that same kindness to someone else." Ethan read the sentence several times. She never mentioned names. She never explained what she had survived. Yet the words carried a depth of gratitude that felt intensely personal. As he continued scrolling, one accompanying photograph caught his attention. Claire stood beside an elderly woman with silver hair and kind eyes. The caption identified her as Margaret Lawson. Around Margaret's neck hung an identification badge from St. and Women's Medical Center. Ethan froze. The name struck a distant memory buried beneath years of routine. St. Anne. He had driven Claire there once late at night because she insisted she needed to pick up paperwork for a friend from the maternity department. He remembered waiting in the parking lot while answering business emails instead of going inside with her. At least that was how he remembered it. Now he found himself wondering whether that memory had been incomplete all along. He looked back at the article one final time before quietly placing the phone on the table. Somewhere inside a hospital he had forgotten, an elderly nurse held answers connected to Claire's darkest season, and for the first time Ethan began to suspect that the greatest misunderstanding of his life had started long before the day Claire disappeared. Sleep never truly arrived that night. Ethan drifted between scattered memories and unanswered questions until the first pale light of morning spread across the skyline outside his penthouse. By 7 o'clock, he had already canceled 2 internal meetings, something almost unheard of for a man whose calendar had been planned weeks in advance. Instead of heading directly to headquarters, he instructed his driver to take him to St. and Women's Medical Center. The hospital looked smaller than he remembered, tucked between newer buildings that had transformed the neighborhood over the years. Fresh flowers lined the entrance, and families quietly moved through the lobby carrying coffee, blankets, and hopeful expressions. Ethan paused just inside the revolving doors, surprised by the strange familiarity of the place. He had been here before, but only now did he realize how little attention he had paid that evening years ago. Back then his mind had remained consumed by investor calls and contract deadlines. Today, every hallway seemed to whisper that he had overlooked something important. At the reception desk, he politely asked whether Margaret Lawson still volunteered at the hospital. The receptionist smiled warmly. "Mrs. Lawson still visits every Tuesday morning for family counseling sessions. She is finishing one now. You are welcome to wait." Ethan thanked her and settled into a quiet corner overlooking the maternity wing. Expectant parents walked past holding hands. Grandparents carried tiny gift bags decorated with baby animals. Nurses greeted patients by name with effortless kindness. Watching them, Ethan found himself wondering how many moments like these Claire might have experienced without him ever knowing. Nearly 20 minutes later, an elderly woman with silver hair stepped into the lobby carrying a canvas tote embroidered with small blue flowers. She moved slowly but confidently, stopping every few feet to exchange cheerful greetings with staff members. Ethan recognized her immediately from the newspaper photograph. He approached respectfully. "Mrs. Lawson?" She looked up with gentle curiosity. "Yes. My name is Ethan Brooks. I hope I am not interrupting your morning." The warmth in her expression remained, though her eyes searched his face carefully. "How may I help you?" Ethan hesitated. I believe you once knew Claire Bennett. At the mention of Claire's name, Margaret's smile softened into something thoughtful. Yes, she answered quietly. I know Claire very well. Ethan noticed there was no hesitation, no uncertainty, only genuine affection. I recently saw her again after many years apart. I discovered that you helped her during a difficult period in her life. Margaret remained silent for several seconds before speaking. Claire has spent many years helping other people. I hope life has been kind to her. Ethan lowered his voice. I am trying to understand something I should have understood a long time ago. Margaret studied him carefully. Understanding and deserving an answer are not always the same thing, Mr. Brooks. Ethan accepted the gentle rebuke without protest. You are right. He glanced toward the maternity wing before continuing. I am not asking you to violate anyone's privacy. I only want to know whether I misunderstood what happened all those years ago. Margaret folded her hands around the strap of her bag. Did Claire send you here? No. Does she know you are here? No. Margaret nodded slowly. Then I cannot tell you her story. Ethan expected the answer, yet disappointment still settled across his face. Before he could thank her and leave, Margaret spoke again. But I can tell you something about human nature. Ethan looked back at her. People often believe silence means someone stopped caring. Sometimes silence is simply the heaviest burden love can carry. The words landed with unexpected force. Margaret continued gently. When I first met Claire, she never spoke badly about you. Not once. Even during her hardest days, she worried more about protecting someone else than protecting herself. Ethan felt his heartbeat quicken. Protecting me? Margaret offered a compassionate smile, without confirming or denying his question. She believed that certain sacrifices only had meaning if no one else carried the weight of them. Ethan struggled to process what he was hearing. It contradicted everything he had believed for years. Was she alone? He asked carefully. Margaret's eyes filled with quiet sadness. No one who walks through this hospital carrying hope and fear at the same time ever feels completely alone. That is why we stay beside them. It was not the answer Ethan wanted. Yet somehow it revealed more than a direct explanation ever could have. As Margaret prepared to leave, she reached into her tote bag and removed a worn envelope. I have kept this for many years because Claire asked me to return it only if life ever created the right moment. Ethan stared at the familiar handwriting on the front before his breath caught in his throat. Across the envelope, written in Claire's unmistakable script, were 5 simple words. For Ethan, if we meet again. The envelope felt impossibly light in Ethan's hands, yet he could not remember the last time something had carried such overwhelming weight. The paper had softened with age, its edges slightly worn, but Claire's handwriting remained unmistakably elegant. Every letter carefully formed exactly as he remembered from the notes she used to leave beside the coffee maker before dawn. Margaret watched him quietly without urging him to open it. She asked me to keep it only if life ever brought you back here, Margaret said softly. I promised I would respect her wishes. Ethan looked at the unopened envelope for several long moments before carefully breaking the seal. Inside rested a single folded sheet of cream-colored stationery. There were no photographs, no dramatic declarations, only a letter written years earlier by someone whose voice he had almost forgotten until the previous evening. His hands trembled slightly as he unfolded the page. Dear Ethan, if you are reading this, then life has been kinder to us than I expected because it means we crossed paths again. I never wanted my silence to become the story you remembered. I only hoped time would someday explain what I could not. If you are angry, you have every right to be. If you moved on, I truly hope you found peace. There is only one thing I have always wanted you to know. I never stopped believing in the man you were becoming. Leaving was never about losing faith in you. It was about believing that your future deserved to exist even if I could no longer be part of it. Ethan stopped reading. His vision blurred as the words settled heavily inside him. There was no accusation, no bitterness, only a kindness that somehow made every assumption he had carried feel even more painful. He forced himself to continue. There may come a day when you learn more than I ever intended you to know. If that happens, please remember one thing before judging the choices I made. Love does not always look like staying. Sometimes love means protecting another person's dream, even when it breaks your own heart. I hope one day you forgive yourself for mistakes you never realized you made, because I already have. Wherever life takes you, thank you for giving me memories that still make me smile. Claire. Ethan lowered the letter slowly. He realized only then that he had been holding his breath. Margaret remained beside him with quiet patience. She wrote that shortly after I met her. Margaret explained gently. She asked me never to deliver it unless you found your way here on your own. She believed that if someone else forced the truth into your hands, it would never truly be yours. Ethan looked toward the maternity wing beyond the glass doors. She forgave me, he whispered, almost unable to believe the words himself. Margaret nodded. Long before you ever asked for forgiveness. Ethan struggled to reconcile the woman described in the letter with the story he had repeated to himself for 8 years. Nothing fit anymore. If Claire had never stopped believing in him, why had she disappeared? If she wanted him to forgive himself, what exactly had she believed he had done wrong? The letter answered one mystery while opening countless others. Mrs. Lawson, he said quietly, there is still something I do not understand. Margaret smiled with gentle compassion. I know. Did Claire leave because she thought she was protecting me? Margaret looked at him for a long moment before answering carefully. The reasons belong to Claire, not to me. But I will tell you this. There are moments in life when people are forced to choose between asking someone they love to carry their burden or carrying it alone. Claire believed she had already made her choice. Ethan closed the letter and carefully returned it to its envelope. He no longer felt anger. Instead, he felt the profound emptiness of realizing that two people had spent years grieving the same love while living completely different versions of the same story. As he prepared to leave, Margaret gently touched his arm. Do not rush to her with questions, she advised. After all these years, answers matter less than the heart you bring when asking them. Ethan thanked her sincerely before stepping back into the cool morning air. For the first time since seeing Claire again, he understood that finding the truth was no longer about proving himself right. It was about honoring everything she had silently carried without asking anyone to rescue her. As his driver pulled away from the hospital, his phone vibrated with a new message from Olivia. She had located the schedule for the Maternal Family Wellness Program's community event the following afternoon, where Claire would be speaking with young families. Ethan looked once more at the envelope resting beside him. He folded it carefully and placed it inside his jacket over his heart. Tomorrow would not be about revisiting the past. It would be about finally listening to the woman whose silence had spoken more honestly than any explanation he had ever imagined. The following afternoon, the community center was filled with a different kind of success than the world Ethan Brooks had spent years building. There were no television cameras, no investors, and no polished speeches about quarterly growth. Instead, folding tables displayed handmade blankets, children's books, and baskets of baby supplies donated by local families. Volunteers greeted every visitor by name, while young parents exchanged encouraging smiles with complete strangers who understood exactly what they were experiencing. Ethan entered quietly through the back of the hall, wearing a simple navy jacket instead of one of his tailored business suits. For the first time in years, he wanted no one to recognize him. He wanted only to listen. Claire stood near the front of the room, speaking with a small group of expectant mothers. She looked peaceful as she described the importance of accepting help without feeling ashamed. Strength is not pretending you never need anyone, she said with a warm smile. Real strength is believing that tomorrow can still be beautiful, even when today feels uncertain. The women around her nodded with grateful expressions. Ethan listened from a respectful distance, realizing those words were meant for far more than the audience standing before her. When the gathering ended, families slowly drifted toward refreshment tables while children laughed in the courtyard outside. Claire thanked the final volunteer before turning and noticing Ethan waiting several feet away. She looked surprised, but not frightened. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. Then Ethan stepped forward with quiet humility. May we talk? Claire studied his face before answering with a gentle nod. They walked together into the center's small garden where flowering trees offered shade above a wooden bench. The afternoon breeze carried the scent of blooming roses, and for the first time since seeing her again, Ethan felt no desire to rush the conversation. I met Margaret Lawson this morning, he said softly. Claire lowered her eyes for only a moment before looking back at him. I wondered if one day you might. Ethan carefully removed the folded envelope from inside his jacket. She gave me your letter. Claire smiled sadly. Then you know at least part of what I never found the courage to say. Ethan shook his head. I know almost nothing. I only know that I spent 8 years believing you stopped believing in us, when the truth was exactly the opposite. Claire took a slow breath. When everything happened, your company was barely surviving. You were carrying so much pressure that you had almost stopped sleeping. Then I learned I was facing serious pregnancy complications. The doctors could not promise anything. They told me months of treatment and complete bed rest might be necessary. Ethan felt the world grow very still around him. Claire continued quietly. I watched you fighting every day to keep your dream alive. I convinced myself that if I told you, you would give up everything to stay beside me. I could not let you sacrifice the future you had worked so hard to build because of uncertainty that even the doctors could not explain. Tears gathered in Ethan's eyes. You should have let me decide. Claire nodded gently. I know that now. But I was young, frightened, and convinced that protecting the person I loved meant carrying the burden alone. Ethan struggled to steady his voice. The pregnancy. Claire rested one hand gently over her stomach. I lost that baby years ago. The words were spoken with quiet acceptance rather than bitterness. Margaret helped me survive the grief. She also helped me rebuild my life when I thought I had nothing left. Ethan closed his eyes as the truth settled inside him. The child Claire carried now belonged to the present, not the past that had haunted them both. The years of silence had been built upon fear, misunderstanding, and two people making impossible decisions without trusting each other enough to face them together. I am so sorry, he whispered. Claire reached out and gently touched his hand. Please do not spend the rest of your life apologizing for what neither of us understood back then. We both made choices out of love, and we both paid for them. Ethan looked at her with a quiet honesty she had not seen in years. I cannot change what happened. I cannot ask for those years back. But I can promise never to hide behind assumptions again. Claire smiled through tears that reflected neither regret nor anger, only peace. That is all I ever hoped for. A little girl suddenly ran into the garden holding a bouquet of wildflowers she had picked with her mother. Miss Claire, she called happily. These are for your new baby. Claire accepted the flowers with heartfelt gratitude before introducing Ethan as an old friend. The little girl smiled brightly, waved, and hurried back toward her family. Ethan watched the simple moment unfold and realized that happiness was rarely found in extraordinary achievements. More often it lived quietly inside ordinary acts of kindness that asked for nothing in return. As the afternoon sun settled across the garden, Claire slipped the silver compass from beneath her necklace and placed it gently in Ethan's hand. I do not need this to remember anymore, she said softly. Ethan looked at the worn pendant before carefully closing his fingers around it. Then I will carry it, he replied, not as a reminder of what we lost, but as a promise to never stop choosing truth over fear. Claire smiled, and for the first time in many years, the silence between them no longer felt like goodbye. It felt like forgiveness, hope, and two hearts finally finding the direction they had been searching for all along.